Hey, are you thinking about buying or selling a business? Join us May 3rd for the M&A Launchpad Conference. This is the premier conference for entrepreneurs, investors navigating mergers and acquisitions in the lower middle market. You're going to connect with top deal makers, gain insight strategies to take your business search and your business acquisitions to the next level. So get your tickets now at malaunchpad.com and use the code LAUNCH for $200 off your ticket. We're looking forward to seeing you.
All right, on today's episode, we interviewed Jeremey Ames with Guidant Financial, and we talked about a lot of different things as an entrepreneur to consider, right? Whether that be how do you go raise equity and leverage a self-directed IRA or 401k to help you go buy a business, or what does it look like to get into franchises and some of the kind of other opportunities for people, and really just some of the I want to call them pitfalls of being an entrepreneur, right? And kind of how difficult it can be, how to find partners, and how to kind of build from there. So, Casey, what were some of your takeaways?
And we covered a lot of stuff. This guy's a serial entrepreneur. So, love to talk to serial entrepreneurs. But, one of the things I think that a lot of people forget is that, if you're in your 40s, 30s, and you've had a good job and a good career, you've got your retirement account that can be your down payment to buy a company. And as Jeremey was talking about, is that a lot of the sellers, if they like you and they see your vision, you may not have to take out an SBA loan. You can use that retirement account to put down. And now all of a sudden you don't have to deal with that type of burden. And that's pretty powerful. And so it goes into detail on a lot of great stuff. And I think for anybody that's interested in buying a business and you've had a career, you've got a 401k, this is a do not miss conversation.
Yeah. And in addition to that, it was just like he said, he's serial entrepreneur, right? We've hit some of the pitfalls that he's hit. We've had the same challenges he's had. And there's a lot of nuggets in this one about those different topics, and even going as far as shiny toy syndrome, right? And how do you help kind of harness that one? So this one's definitely a broad conversation, lots of different topics to go through.
Hey guys, go ahead and just pause the podcast for a second. When you're buying a business, you need to ensure the financial health of the company. The quality of earnings is mission critical. It doesn't matter what size business you're buying. Patrick O'Connell Advisory Group, they're dynamic. They do a great job. They're going to look over your shoulder. They're going to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And this guy's done over 200 buyers successfully, just like you. So reach out to him. And it's o'conneladvisorygroup.com. Click the link in our show notes. Can't live without this.
Hey, Jeremey, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet, man. So serial entrepreneur, man of many talents, and kind of helped to launch a lot of business. I think we have a lot to talk through today. So maybe just give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah. So I started my first business about 23 years ago. It was a real estate company. It doesn't exist today, but it did lead me to a number of other opportunities, of which this one with Guidant Financial we've been working at for 22 years. We've helped over 30,000 people get started as business owners, primarily using their retirement funds to actually invest in a business where their retirement plan becomes an owner of the company. They're not borrowing money from their 401k. They're actually becoming their own angel investor in essence.
It's pretty amazing. My wife, 10 years ago, did a franchise, and we used her 401k to do the franchise fees and all that good stuff. So we went through that process, and it was a little clunky for us back in those days because I think it was relatively new, and I imagine you guys have, but very powerful, right? Because we were able to utilize those funds to create a business, and it led my wife to the career she's in right now. So it was well worth what we did.
What did you buy, and how did it go?
The franchise wasn't great. She bought she's in corporate events, and so it was an event management company. But it led her to the company she's been with now for 8 years, and she's been doing a great job there. They became her client, and then they hired her, and then that franchise kind of fell off. But man, it all because we took that retirement account, utilized that for our business. It was powerful.
Yeah, and for people to know, people don't realize that you can use your retirement accounts, whether it's a 401k or an IRA, right? And you can use it to go buy a business. You can also use it to invest passively in some other syndication too. So for us on the real estate side, we've had a ton, millions of dollars that has been invested through people getting their own self-directed IRAs. And so not the topic for the show, but something that is important for people to realize because it's another way to unlock potential, right? And you're constantly looking for tools in your utility belt as an entrepreneur of how do I go accomplish the next goal?
Totally.
Yeah. And so then I guess kind of taking on from there. So maybe fast forward a little bit. So after that, what did you kind of end up going?
You mean, what have I done since then?
Yeah.
We founded a few different companies. I've owned 3 different franchises. Probably the biggest thing we've done recently is about 4 or 5 years ago, we split off a company that has become a global staffing firm. And that company has grown like crazy. It's just been perfect timing when you look at the move towards remote work and the technology that backs up the ability to have people support you no matter where they are in the world.
Got it. And so maybe I guess I have a question. You've
Yeah.
done franchises. You've also started a business from scratch.
Yep.
How would you compare the two, right? Is it buy then build or is it something else?
They're so very different, right? I see that they serve different purposes. I think most of the people who are effective at the startup game have one of two things true. One, they either have something they're really passionate about that they understand really, really well that they want to get into, or they're just the kind of person who wants to create and work within their own set of boundaries. And usually startup people I don't worry too much about, because if you're a startup person, you're a startup person. It's not like you don't have to be convinced about it. Franchises, I think, can be a great way for people to get started because it takes some of the intimidation factor down of how many things that they have to figure out when they first start. And for some people, it's great and it can turn into great things. But most franchise models are built so that you have to own multiple units for it to really be the kind of business that's going to generate a meaningful return. So I see one of two paths that successful franchisees go. Either they get in and they turn themselves into a multi-unit franchise owner, or they get in and they decide, I don't know that the franchise thing is right for me, but they see some other adjacent problem within that industry or that format, and then they go find the solution to it. I mean, your example, Casey, may be one, right? Your wife is hopping from this franchise opportunity. She finds another opportunity that's adjacent with the company she's working with. And then existing businesses, I am a big fan of people buying existing businesses, because if you are somebody who's already a mature professional and you are going to become a business owner in an environment where you have something to lose, an existing business is the best way to de-risk that, because you can walk into something that has existing revenue, existing customers, and the ability to actually pay you to work in the business. One of the things that I think really sinks a lot of new business owners is they got to pay their own personal expenses. And if they start drawing that off their investment in the business, it just chokes out the cash flow and the lifeblood of what keeps it going.
Especially that first couple of years. It's that first couple of years, cash management, big time. And that's just that piece. But it's nice to know that somebody sitting back right now that's like, man, I got to go out and raise money to buy that company. Now they're like, hey, I could actually use my 401k, my retirement to help me buy that. So talk to us a little bit about that process, because I'm sure you talk to people every day and it's like a light bulb comes on, like, oh man, I can tap that and without having to give up. Because let me just explain. You go out and raise money from an investor, you're going to give up equity, right? It's going to be just the trade that the person's going to do. But if you're able to do a solo acquisition, right, you're going to get the beast of the pie. You're going to get most of it. So you're going to maximize your return profile. So if you've got money sitting there in your retirement and you're saying, hey, should I tap it? What is my rate of return? What is my risk? I mean, these are all the questions someone has to ask, right? It's like, man, I'm risking my retirement on this, or I'd rather raise money. I mean, these are like real questions that people are sitting back asking. So how do you help somebody think through that conversation?
The approach we take is just an educational one, because there's no one right answer for any one person. For example, there are people who will pay off their mortgages, people who are really smart about finances. Now, when you do the math on paying off your mortgage, it almost never makes sense, because you get this giant tax write-off for it. You can keep it at a low interest rate. But for some people, it helps them sleep at night, right? And if so, awesome. That's the right thing for them. Some people don't want to get started in a business and have any debt because they're so worried about the cash flow payment that's going to have to come out to go to the lender. They're worried about liens on their homes, things like that. Other people don't want to touch their retirement funds because they, look at those as some sacred cow that's saved for the future. So we try not to get too on a soapbox about what the right answer is, and more just educate about the pros and cons. Now, I will tell you, for most businesses that are buying smaller companies, raising investors is really, really tough unless you're going to go with just friends and family, because most angel investors out there are looking for a pretty dynamic return, and you're not going to get that on $1 million or $2 million business generally, unless it's part of some broader roll-up strategy. So for most of those people, you're looking at things like friends and family raise, SBA loans, 401k investments. Those are the big ones. And sometimes people stack them. I was just talking to a client a few months ago who, his golden handcuffs for him was that he was so successful. He was making tons of money, like $400,000 or $500,000 a year. And that was the thing that always kept him from pursuing this dream. But when he found out he could use retirement funds, he said, oh, well, wait a second. I've already done the math on an SBA loan. So if I've got $1 million in my retirement account, I can go out and buy a $5 million business with this. And that will have enough of a return to be able to pay me something that's not going to force a dramatic backstep in terms of my lifestyle.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thought process someone has to have. But, like with my wife, we didn't have a huge retirement account, but it made sense, right? Why would we utilize, what good is that retirement account if the market changes or whatever happens, but we can take control of it today and we can put it into something that we believe in ourselves can make it prosper. And it happened. It didn't work out that way, to be honest with you. We took that money out. It created something that didn't work, but it gave that vehicle. It led to the next opportunity, which was great.
Yeah, and maybe I'd say, as a entrepreneur, right, the capital stack matters. And so to kind of your point, Jeremy, do I want to take on debt? That matters, right? There's pros and cons to each of those things. But then as you kind of move up the food chain, right, you do, start to have to unlock certain things, whether it's, your IRA or raising money. And I tell people don't get deterred about raising money. There is a art to it, right? And to your point, it starts with friends and family because most people don't know you well enough to say, well, hey, I know you've never ran a metal plating shop, but I'm going to trust you to do it, right? That's only friends and family that know you well enough. But again, there's money out there to be had, but it's about putting together a full-blown thesis, full-blown strategy and, working that and being able to do it. And there's pros and cons with investors too, because now you have someone to report to, someone that's going to ask questions, someone that's going to keep you accountable, right? And so again, people need to ask themselves, what is it that I actually want? And then, how do I match the equity and kind of the rest of the capital stack to that thesis?
And that's key because not everybody wants the same thing out of a business. Some people want to grow it to be $100 million. Some people just want to have a couple $1 million company that allows them to go to Europe 5 weeks a year and not have to stress about it and be able to make all their kids' soccer games. I mean, that's why.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah. And so then, Jeremy, so just for the listeners, right? Today you mentioned you've helped 10,000 companies launch over the past couple of years?
30,000.
30,000. All right, I got that off only by 3.
A lot of companies.
So then I guess, maybe tell us what are some of the trends that you're seeing, right? Maybe from a couple of years ago to now, what's been changing in the market, whether that be capital or types of deals or people are looking at, or is it, methodologies, et cetera?
We're seeing a lot more excitement towards existing businesses in general in terms of demand. But I think people underestimate how difficult it is to find a good existing business. And what I mean by that is when you look at startup versus franchise versus existing business, a startup's the easiest to get into because no one's going to gate you. You can start tomorrow and do whatever you want. A franchise is just a little step up in terms of how easy it is to get started, usually requires a little more capital, and you got to at least go through a diligence process. But an existing business, it is heavy work up front to find a good one. Now, it can save you a lot of work in the long term in terms of all the things that are in place. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that, but maybe a lot of people also stalling out because they're not sure how to connect the dots of actually finding and evaluating and choosing a company that's out there. We're seeing really an increased number of people that are using retirement funds over the last 12 to 18 months. We saw quite a bit of a dip during the COVID period of time. And as interest rates have sort of stayed high and inflation has stayed high, we're seeing at least a real reduction in the number of people that are pursuing SBA loans and the use of debt. And that's, I think, just by nature of, when you're talking about effective 10% rates, and then you start to do what that turns into in terms of a cash payment when you're amortizing that over 10 years and what that does to the cash flow of the business. I think that scares a few people off of the SBA side.
Yeah, and that's where you start talking to the seller saying, hey, I can put down a hefty down payment and I want you to be the financer. And that's where that becomes a question, right? I mean, that becomes a very solid conversation, which I'm having daily with people that are, at that age and they're looking to transition is, they are open to be in the bank because 1, they don't necessarily need the cash. 2, they don't really want the big tax clip to hit them. And three, most of them love their business and there's a longevity there. And if they really believe that you can help them transition their business, they'll support you. But having your 401k, being able to draw that money down and show them a sizable down payment is going to go a very long way.
Huge. In fact, I just talked to a client last week who bought a golf course, and he went to, this was sort of an opportunistic thing. His brother sent him a Craigslist listing of this golf course, and it was less expensive to buy this golf course than it was for the houses that they were looking at in downtown Seattle. And so he was really intrigued. He started looking at this thing, and they decided to put an offer in on it. But they took the time to go down and spend some time at the golf course and meet with the seller. And that made all the difference, because when they gave their offer, they had said, hey, we're going to put this money down. We'll close this over 90 to 120 days. And the seller came back and said, nah, we really like your family. We think you guys are the type of people who can keep this thing going in the way that we think. We want you to close it in 30 days. And if you can put down 20%, we'll finance the rest. Like, you don't get those opportunities unless you are working to develop a relationship to show someone that you want to be a continuation of their, legacy.
And we talk about this a lot, right? And I mean, and again, Casey's one of the best at it. I mean, it's important to go belly to belly with the sellers, right? With previous podcasts, we've talked about how much, it makes a difference just to be one of the only guys that show up, right? Most people will try to do it all on Zoom or on phone calls or, whatever it is, name your thing, versus just showing up. Very different. Again, you have to understand the demographic of the people you're working with, right? Most baby boomers are people that didn't grow up with cell phone in their pocket, right? It was not about the instant communication. It was about meeting people and having more genuine connections. And so the more you do that, the more you relate to them and the more you can open up some of those opportunities that you might not have gotten otherwise. And so it's huge, and it makes a deal that might be skinny all of a sudden start to look like a home run, right? And kind of makes it very lucrative.
Yeah, and that connection piece is so important. I think one of the things that I often see people get wrong is they think they have to posture themselves like a peacock, where they're preening to make them seem as if they're the best out there, rather than just connecting with someone and being a real human and recognizing there are some things that you don't know when you walk into a new business. And you want a seller who looks at you and sees a little piece of themselves in you and says, I'm willing to help this guy out to get started. And that was the case with this guy who bought the golf course. Like, this seller was so fantastic to him in terms of the guidance he gave him and the way that he helped structure the deal and set the stage for the team. And that never would have happened if he hadn't, laid those tracks.
Was that golf course in Seattle?
No, it was in Coos Bay, actually, in Oregon.
Wow. I don't even know where that is.
That's the northern part, right?
Yeah, it's right outside of Bandon Dunes, like 20 minutes outside of Bandon Dunes.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Interesting.
So it's probably very beautiful, but you probably get on the course for 4 months out of the year. It's probably very seasonal, right?
Yeah, although he's done some interesting things. They built a big covered area over the driving range. They've done a lot of things with sort of community. So yeah, they make a huge part of their money in the summer, but then they also make a big chunk of their money at the beginning of the year with membership. So there's really two components to it, right? It's the vacation visitor season, and then it's the membership, which is really about the connection to the local community. And that's something I think he's done really well with this business.
Yeah, and if you get it right, I mean, that's pretty beautiful, especially if you don't have a big debt that you're dealing with the lender, right?
Yep.
And stuff's expensive these days. Financing's very expensive.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. And so then maybe you got any more interesting stories like that of just, deals that have shown up in awkward ways from some of your clients, or, things that they did to kind of get really creative, just for listeners to kind of get some more ideas as to what things are out there.
Creativity on the financing side?
Financing or deal sourcing or, all the above. So.
Oh man, I talked to one client a few weeks ago that I thought was genius on a deal sourcing. So this guy was an engineer. He had worked in San Francisco for a bunch of the different big tech companies. And he had already been through 2 startups that he was a part of a co-founding team that didn't go anywhere. He had bought a multi-unit franchise that had basically died in the midst of COVID. And so he decided, I'm going to buy an existing business and I'm going to buy something that's recession proof. So this is how an engineer's mentality works. He goes to the SBA data and he pulls all of the SBA default rates by industry. And he looks at the ones with the lowest default rates and he says, which of these are the types of businesses that I would pay for even if I was struggling and my income was much lower? And so he identified auto repair and home repair services. And so then he says, okay, now how am I going to find these businesses? Because most of the stuff that's online for listings is just kind of garbage. So he started building this filtering program that would pull through Google. He sat down with his wife and he looked at the United States map and picked like 10 MSAs that they would be willing to live in, because he had decided, hey, for this business to be successful, I've got to be there on the ground. So he picked 10 MSAs, and then he built this search tool that would pull in all the companies in these two verticals, and that would look for and filter them based on Google and Yelp reviews. And what he was looking for was, let me find a business that has a really limited footprint on online marketing, but that has really strong reviews from the people who have submitted things. And ultimately, he ended up buying an auto repair business. He had planned to take down an SBA loan, but he was able to buy this thing in just cash because he found one that was small enough. I want to say he paid $300,000 or $400,000 for it, and within 2 years, he had grown it to $2.5 million. And last time I talked to him, he was looking at expanding into a second location.
Yeah, it's the beauty. Get it rolling, get that cash flow going, and now, right, you get your systems, your process, your people.
But before you do that, you got to have a clear thesis, right? And he knew what his thesis was, and then he built the strategy around identifying that opportunity.
Yeah, and what's important to note about his that I think a lot of people miss is he got to that thesis because he fell on his face a few times. Like, I'm tired of the number of people who tell me, like, I'm just waiting for the right business. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm looking at the new listings on Biz Buy Sell, and when something comes in, I'm submitting for information on it. I know those people are not going to move forward, because that's the equivalent of like showing up at the gym and then checking in and then leaving. Like, all the action happens when you get in there and do the hard reps. And the hard reps are getting the information in and filtering it and learning what is it that works and doesn't work for me, and how do I learn to evaluate a business and understand where the risks are. That's a muscle that you have to build. And most people don't put in enough work to actually have clarity of that vision. And without clarity of that vision, most people won't move forward.
No, 100% agree. I mean, to hit a home run, you have to go up to bat and swing a few times, and there's going to be some misses, and that's just part of the game.
But I think what you mentioned, I mean, it goes back to Think and Grow Rich and all the great, business development, mastery, which is, having a clear vision of what you're trying to do, right? So that falls back on why you create a thesis. You're not creating a thesis because you're just trying to waste time. You're trying to get a crystallized vision of what industry, what market, what makes sense, what you want to travel, what you want to do.
Yep.
And then you start going down that road. It doesn't mean that new opportunities aren't going to pop up, but it's crystallizing that vision. And that's such a big part of this, is just visualizing. The coolest part is we got ChatGPT now. I can literally I do it all the time. I just something passes by and I'm like, create a business plan around this concept. Boom. And all of a sudden I look and I'm like, oh man, that's actually pretty good. It would have taken me months to research that. Now we've got ways to generate ideas quickly and being able to think of thesis. And speaking of thesis, Feras and I last year, being here in Texas, water is such a big critical conversation. And so we were like, hey, we're going to get into the water industry, wastewater, water, any of that. We're going to get into it. So we chased a company, got down to closing in November. It fell apart. It happens, right? But we were very close, built a great relationship. I think it is a 2026 deal that we will get right back on and ride really well. But in the meantime, we had a very small kind of bolt-on that has this hidden recurring revenue in it that we've been pursuing since November. And it's just like, hey, I could sit there and wait for that perfect big deal, or let's take the deal down. That's small. That would be a great bolt-on. Man, what a great story to tell that when we roll that next one in is like, now we didn't stop. We know our vertical.
It gets you deeper in the vertical, gets you the name recognition, and you can start to identify other opportunities that you would not have otherwise. So.
Yeah. What I hear is start with a thesis, but write it in pencil.
Exactly. And get to work, because, that's the other part, is because as you were saying, it's like, get in it, go talk to owners. Don't stop go, just go at it, and things are going to uncover along the way.
Yeah.
That's great. So kind of in the talk real quick for us, because you've done complete absolute startup, right? And then it moved the business to grow. So Guidant's been around for 23 years, correct?
Guidant's been around for 22 years.
22 years. Guidant's been around 22 years. So at what point in Guidance were you like, hey, I'm going to go out and buy franchises and I'm going to make another acquisition? When does that thought process happen? Because I imagine you had some critical mass in your business and you said, hey, I now can go and do other things.
I think, Casey, it's what they call shiny toy syndrome.
Yeah.
At least that's how it started for me. So
I
the
know all
first,
about that.
what's that? You know all about
I know
that?
all about that.
So the first foray into it was as the business first started to be successful, we had some cash sitting on the sidelines. So what should we do? Let's invest in another business. And so we went out and started a startup franchise unit. And my wife primarily did that and ran into some issues with a partner, and that never really went anywhere. And then we had the real estate business that we had started with, and it was getting to the point where we didn't want to continue to maintain it. And so we merged it into a real estate franchise that we were then part owners of. There was a point where I left Guidant for a year to create another startup. Didn't go particularly well because I started with this beautiful field of dreams idea of what I wanted to build instead of actually starting with a customer and figuring out what problem I was going to solve.
I've done that twice.
So what's that?
I've done that twice. I thought it's a great idea, but like, what problem are you solving? I don't care. I'll figure it out along the way. You're like, that's not the best way to start.
Yep. At one point, my business partner and I bought a franchise because we had a family member that we thought would be perfect to run it. And as soon as we closed on this thing, we realized she had no interest in running it. And so then we sort of kept it, put together with duct tape and a little bit of tar for a few years, and then ended up selling it off just because the opportunity cost of focusing any time on it wasn't great. So, those are some of the ones we've fallen down on, but we've gotten a little better in what I've learned to do as I've gotten older is channel my shiny toy syndrome in a particular direction. It used to be all over the place with things that didn't align with each other. And now it's all about how can I find a shiny tool that's in the same direction of helping people in the business world. And, this company that we spun off 5 years ago, we did it because we were solving a problem for our business. And then as we tried to solve the problem for our business, we saw all these holes and frustrations we had in the market. And so we just came to this inevitable point where we had to decide either we're going to bail on this concept in general or we're going to create it. And what we had learned from in the past is that we got to be all in or all out. And so, we broke up the band. David and I used to, both be in the business on a day-to-day basis. And we just said, hey, if we're going to do it, you got to go run that full time and you got to make it work. And we're going to raise a little bit of money for it so we can go big and go fast.
That is fantastic. It's great having a partner along the way in the journey, right?
Oh, huge. I feel so lucky because, I've been parts of panels where people said, oh, you had a partnership for 22 years. Like, how have you made it work? And I'm like, I got lucky. It wasn't like we didn't sit down and do personality assessments. We didn't have premarital counseling before we decided to partner on deals. We just started working together, and it just so happened that he was somebody who I have strong values alignment with, and we want the same things. And so I think about my business partnership in the same way I think about my marriage. If you have someone who has the same values as you and they want the same thing as you in the long run, and you're willing to put in the work when things get hard with each other, like, it's amazing. It's better than going, like, the hardest part of entrepreneurship is how lonely it can feel. So you've got to find a way to find that support network. It can be through a partner. It can be through an organization like EO. I've been a part of that organization for 20 years, but you got to find your tribe of people who understand what you're going through, because you're going to have moments where you're staring into the dark abyss saying, I'm about to just jump overboard, and you need someone to help you take a step back and let go of the emotions and process, like, what is it you want? And what are you in control of? And what does that mean about where you want to go next?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that. And I mean, I completely agree. Having good partners can make the pain so much more enjoyable, right? I've had, not great partners. I've had amazing partners. And, it's about finding people that have the same goals and the same long-term goals too, right? Like for Equity Launchpad, our goal is not, we're just going to build something for the next year. We have a much more longer-term goal. Everybody's aligned on it, and it makes it easier because you're going to have problems. You're going to have stumbles. You're going to have frustrations. You're going to be mad at each other. And it's about, hey, here's the problem, solve it and move forward. But it's about constantly keeping things moving forward. And, having someone to vent to is so valuable. Like, I mean, Casey said, like, you spend 6 months on a deal that it blows up at the end. It's like, well, that sucks. And, you go home and your spouse is usually not going to even be able to understand just how broad and what's going on. I mean, I had this conversation yesterday with my wife, and she wants to know a lot more of the details, but I'm like, man, like, it's really hard for me to even articulate like, well, here's the 75 different decision trees that we went down today just for this one problem today. And here's why we went through there's a lot going on. Right. And she's not as involved. And I think most people have that same problem. Right. And so a lot of times the spouse is really not the person you can vent to about the details. You need to have that outlet. Right. So then you can kind of get refocused and talk through, here are the solutions, and then move it forward again. So,
yeah. And someone to balance you out, right? Somebody who has some strengths where maybe you have some weaknesses. That's the other benefit of a partnership. It's the same thing as a marriage. Like, you tend to be attracted to the people that help you be better because they pull you in particular directions that you're not normally inclined to go. And in my experience, that's led to much better decision making over the years.
Yeah, and help you see the blind spots that you're not seeing too, right? Just someone to just play devil's advocate. Like, because again, similarly to you, Jeremy, I have shiny toy syndrome too, right? I mean, I love thinking of new ideas and, hey, here are all the ways to work it out. But then it's good to kind of pause and talk through, okay, let's talk about the downside risks of each of these things also, right? And, going back to helping just kind of stay focused on toys that are at least all marching in the same direction. So,
yeah, no, I'd say that's very much what I've done in the last 4 or 5 years, is just getting really focused on our thesis. And then I can be shiny syndrome inside that thesis.
Same.
I can start kicking rocks and doing all that stuff. And you're right. It's channeling that energy, because as entrepreneurs, we're excited about everything. I mean, like, you could talk to me about an industry and I'm like, oh my God, this is like amazing. Like, I got stuck the other day just like reading articles about AI and what I need to be doing with it and all this stuff. And I'm like, hold on, I just need to find the person that knows this shit and like bring them on the team. Because if I have to stop, but I my tendency is to try to become that guy. And I'm like, man, then if I do that, I'm going to miss out on all the other stuff that I'm good at. So I was trying to really find that.
All right. So let's talk through the solution that Casey had. So instead of having shiny toy syndrome and wanting to build a business in a million different industries, we created one thesis, which is buying businesses. So now any business we buy, we can be in any industry, still meets that thesis.
You just change the boundaries. I get that.
Just change the boundaries, and it works. So.
That's it, man. And it's all critical infrastructure. So that's my thesis.
Yeah, you have more boundaries than you talk about, because you've said critical infrastructure, right? And to me, the best analogy is bumper bowling. When you put the bumpers up and you throw the ball down the lane, even if you only hit one pin, that's one more pin that you didn't have, right? So even when you miss, you're learning something that's still relevant for the other things that you're trying to do, and that open doors. Like, even just the conversations I'm guessing you guys are having about potential M&A deals in this vertical is helping you learn about new opportunities. It's helping you identify people that might be great operators in the future. It's helping you identify other vendors or people you could, business develop for some of your other brands that you have. I mean, when they're all aligned in one direction, even when you miss, you can still hit a pin.
Yeah, we spent the last 2 days of the year, Ben and I and Feras and other analysts, Ben, we all locked the door, got a wipe. We said, hey, we've been going at this now for 2 years. We've got a business under our belt. We've got a lot of ideas. Let's create our business plan. Now let's take all of our ideas. And we really hammered home what Equity Launchpad is going to be. And even to the point where we flew in, 12 different people to come in on a day and did kind of a workshop, took them to dinner just to get their feedback. Like, hey, what do y'all think? And so we've been very proactive on our plan. What's been nice is like, it's almost like, wow, we're cohesive. It's amazing. That first couple of years, you're just spinning a lot of plates and you're trying to figure out, who are we? And then it's just every day gets a little bit more. And then as a partnership, we come together and we're like, hey, this is where we're going. We put even tighter bumpers in. And now we're just starting to really come together. It's very exciting to watch a plan come together.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I love about entrepreneurship, is that creativity. And I'm that guy when at the very beginning of the podcast, there's 2 types of entrepreneurs. I love creating. I love being a part of a creative process. I'm addicted to it. It is a drug. And, and I just enjoy it. And so that's kind of that thing and that love for entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Makes it tough to be married to us, because our ideas of retirement maybe don't look the same as our spouses.
No, I'll never be. Yeah, my retirement is just being a VC and investing in other people to go do it for, alongside with. So awesome.
Cool. So let's jump on. So Jeremy, thank you. We're going to jump into our rocket round. This is where we ask all of our guests three questions. So first one, what do you like to do in your free time?
Oh man, I love to write, read, travel, hang out with friends. Coach. I coached for many years my son's baseball team. That was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Any good books you're reading right now?
So many books that I'm reading right now. Let me think about one that I've read recently that was really impactful. I think Dan Heath has a new one called Reset. And that was one I thought was a pretty good take on how to think about fixing things that aren't working the way that you want them to. And I liked it so much that I gave that to my leadership team for this quarter and said, this is going to be our book.
Nice. I just finished a book and I've got 5 credits sitting on my Audible. So I'm that is why I'm buying it. That's as soon as we're done.
There you go. All right. Next question. Most memorable moment in your business journey?
Good or bad? I mean, there are some that are burned into my memory.
Hey, good and bad are both memorable. So your choice.
Yeah.
We typically get both sides of the question too. It's not just good things. I mean, like a lot of times it could be that, that time that I missed payroll, right? I mean, whatever it is that memorable for you.
Yeah. I mean, the one that's seared in my mind is I remember sitting in a conference room in 2009, talking on the phone to some attorneys. And we had spent 30 minutes with them trying to understand what our options were. And at the end, I said, and what is it going to cost us for you guys to help us with this? And they said, well, you're going to have to start with a $50,000 retainer. And I looked across the table at David and I said, David, we don't even have enough cash to go bankrupt. And it was in that moment, right, where it almost felt ironic to think about, we thought, oh, we're going to do a bankruptcy restructure and that's going to help us get out of some of these contracts that were just overblown for the size of the company that we were having to sort of scale down in the Great Recession. But I'm so grateful for that moment because knowing that option was blocked, we just buckled down and thought differently about the business. And it was painful, but we came out much smarter than we started because when we were young and things were going well and up and to the right, we solved every problem by just throwing people at it. And if you've been in business long enough, you guys know that's not a sustainable solution, right? It actually ends up creating more cost and complexity over time because the more people you add, the more opportunities there are for things to go sideways and get confused. And so that was a really pivotal moment for us just to recognize like, hey, I can go to the deepest, darkest moments and we can find a way out just by being scrappy and just continuing to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I like it. So not having enough to go bankrupt.
Well, I'll tell you, man, it's one of those other things where you think about it's like we learn in those hardest times. And so those people that are in those hard times, it's being optimist, like, okay, we're learning here. Instead of going, oh my God, it's the end of the world. It's like, what am I learning? Why am I here? And it's going to help you take that next step. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And on that same vein, not to go on a tangent, but I mean, that's why we're in the seats that we're in, right? We're there to solve problems. We're not there to like pat ourselves on the back and, hey, woe me and keep going straight. Like problems come to us. We have to solve them. So,
yeah.
Cool. And then last question, what is your favorite tool or resource?
This is going to be a little bit of a tangent here, but we had run our business on EOS for a while, so the Entrepreneur Operating System.
And we use that as well.
We got to a scale where it was creating a lot of friction in our business. It was creating a lot of bottlenecks, and I didn't know what the answer was to get out of it. So I hired in a coach that specialized in organizational design. And he helped me create a framework that's a slight modification of EOS that involves one weekly meeting with a much broader team than just the executives, but also included the managers of each key function, and a format for me to get all the information about the key things that were happening in the business, but that forced me to sort every issue that was coming in into one of 3 buckets, either something that was not important enough for the entire leadership team that I just needed to say, you guys figure that out. You decide if that's important and if you have time for it, but it's not going to be something we focus on here. So that's one bucket. The second bucket was things we need to take action on right now. So those are the things I'm looking at and go, that's a priority. I need to be clear on what needs to happen, who's going to own it, and when it's going to get done. And then a third bucket, which he called the CEO soapbox, which is just an opportunity for me to say, hey, this is not an action step we need to take, but there's something important that I need to communicate to all of you at the same time. So you all have context for who our customer is, how we need to think about our values, how we need to think about these types of problems. And it's just been such an amazing tool for me to actually delegate ownership. I used to delegate more tasks of things this has forced me to say, okay, but who actually owns that? Because I'm not going to solve it in this meeting. I'm going to give it to that person and they're going to do the work and come back and tell this group what the answer is going to be. And I'll get my chance to weigh in and decide if it's something I need to veto. But, in the 3 years since we've implemented it, I haven't had to veto a single thing.
Wow.
And for us, one of the most powerful things we did whenever we were kind of rolling out EOS is spending the time to get a good accountability chart, right? And then starting to hold people to it just to get that clarity and get that ownership, because it's night and day, right? Because, again, as an entrepreneur, you're starting something usually. So you're doing 100% of the things. And then you're like, I need some help. So I need to hand off simple things to somebody, because your first help is probably not your most, not the most, high impact people yet, right? You can't afford to hire people, all the above. So then you get used to delegating out tasks, and then you keep going down. Then you start maybe trying to divide out things, but it's still very task oriented versus, hey, this is your responsibility. It is your responsibility to go build out the accounting discipline, to go make sure there's budgets for everything, all of that. You come to me for the problems and when you're stuck, for example. And so it's a mindset shift you have to do as an entrepreneur to kind of start to get to that next level. And it's very impactful.
Yeah. My wife and I have very different ways of doing the dishes. Right. And so if I think that she needs to do it my way, it creates pain, and vice versa. The reality is the dishes get cleaned both ways, but it's helpful to know who actually owns getting the dishes done, because that's the person who gets to decide how.
I thought we were talking about delegating, and you just delegate them out to her. No, you're responsible for the dishes.
That was my first.
No, actually, I do the dishes.
I was like, this has to be done this way. And she's like, why? And it's like, eventually you're just like, hold on, this is stupid. Like, just get it done, So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, because you think that the way that your mind works is the way that it has to be done. And that's been the real thing that I think's had to shift in my mind as the business has gotten bigger, is I have to take myself out of the creative problem solving, this is how to solve it, and spend my time to get really clear on what is it that needs to happen. And who is the person who needs to own making that happen? Because that's what I need to give, not the task of, hey, fold the towel in, thirds, but hey, the towels need to get folded and be in the closet. I'm using examples from home because those are the ones that hit home for me. That's where I'm not always feeling like I'm the boss. That's where I have the best context.
Me too. Don't worry.
I definitely know the feeling. Good. Awesome. Well, Jeremey, how can people get a hold of you?
You can follow me or reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to me personally. And if you want any more information on how to use retirement funds to invest in a business, we got tons of information, a big educational resource site on guidantfinancial.com. And that's Guidant financial.com. It's not Guidant, it's Guidant. But, it was 22 years ago when we decided on the branding. So you'll have to forgive us.
Hey, that's whenever the removing certain letters was popular. So it's all good. All right, Jeremy. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Great meeting.
All right, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, guys. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.